Hi, I'm Chef Norman Van Aken, the newest board member of the Trotter Project, and very happy to be involved.
Well, Chef, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today and for having us in your beautiful restaurant, Norman's, in Orlando, Florida.
My pleasure. Thank you for coming.
Such a fun adventure to be here today. So let's take it back to the start of your story, back in Lake County, Illinois. Tell us about your background and really what made you first fall in love with the culinary arts.
Looking back on it, I do know that I fell in love with food very early on, but no one at all in their right mind would have said, yes, I want to be a chef one day. Not coming from where I was from, people maybe aspire to be plumbers and carpenters and house painters, and maybe if they're extra aspirational, maybe teachers and things like that. But if you said, oh, I'm going to be a chef, they would have said, you need to lay down, take some aspirin or something, because it just wasn't in the character of the place and the times. There were things on television like Julia Child, but I didn't watch those things. But my mother or my grandmother, when they would cook or prepare things, I was so charged up by that. I mean, I remember hearing later when the internet came out and an email, and a babysitter of mine contacted me to say, you won't remember me, but I was your babysitter when you were 6 years old. And one night I'd come over to babysit you and your sisters, but your sisters were gone over at the neighbors doing something. And so I fixed you dinner. And you got so mad at me that you threw the plate on the ground and you stomped out of the room. I was 6. My father came home to find the 13-year-old babysitter distraught. What's wrong? Well, Norman didn't like the fact that I cooked him a hot dog for dinner. And my father, which blows my mind because I don't have any recollection of him being like this at all, said, well, Norman has some unrealistic attitude when it comes to food, and especially its presentation. I'm 6. So consonant with the idea of becoming a chef one day, no. But the fact that food and its flavors mattered so greatly to me was early on.
What was that aha moment that you would say that you had to go down that path to become a chef?
I struggled with sort of accepting that path. I was cooking to make money. I had answered an ad for a short order cook after having been fired from being a hot tar roofer and laughing because a rainstorm rolled in Libertyville, Illinois. I'll always remember we were roofing the high school, and the storm came in, a powerful August storm, and everybody raced down the ladders to go to their cars and trucks and their beat up jalopies. And I stopped as soon as I got to the grass and just rolled around in the grass, so happy that the tar and the smell and the funk and the heat and the grime and the sweat of being a roofer was washing off me in this thunderous storm. And in my role, I ran into a human form, and that was my boss. My arms hit his legs, and he said, Van Aken, we don't need your type around here any longer. So I was happy. Got in my beat up jalopy, cost $100, and I roared out of that parking lot and got about 3 miles down the road and realized I have to pay rent pretty soon. So I went and I got this flyer called The Advertiser, and it was a newspaper. It was new news. It was all about, where you could buy a boat or a lawnmower or get a job. And so I took that to where I was renting this house with 6 other ne'er-do-wells, and I went through that newspaper, and there was an ad that said short order cook needed, no experience necessary. So I circled that ad in the newspaper and realized I should hide my long hair because this was 1972 and it wasn't really a thing for the Midwesterners. So I tucked it back and went in and applied for a job at this diner. And they said, yeah, come tomorrow morning at 6:30. You'll be a breakfast person. And so that's how it began. But I did like it. But I didn't think of myself as being a cook or a short order cook or any kind of a cook as my real career path. But I kept going from, let's say, well, soon after that, I moved to Key West again. And that's down in Key West. That was kind of a good job to get. And there was a lot of places hiring because it was a tourist town. And I did like it, but I didn't have the aha moment. That took a while.
And where did you go once you got to Key West?
To work?
Yes.
Okay. My first job in Key West was at a place called the Midget Bar and Grill. It was opened 24 hours, and the man that hired me told me I'd be cooking barbecue. I said, I don't really know how to cook barbecue. And he said, that's okay. You're going to be working the midnight shift. The people who come in here at that hour will be so messed up, they won't know the difference. There's a vote of confidence. So I did that. And it was one of the performers, because they had a 6-string guitar player. Oftentimes, one of the performers was an unknown strummer named Jimmy Buffett, who played in his shorts and bare feet. And this was Key West. This was 1972, 1973, 1974. I moved from one job to the other, but I still hadn't had that moment of aha at all. It took a while. And I think the moment of aha really came around 8 years into cooking. That seems like a lifetime to people who especially are at the age of the chefs and the cooks in my kitchen right now. To not know what you're doing after 6 or 7 years maybe seems ridiculous, but it just didn't. I hadn't seen where art and the work intersected. We worked super hard, and we liked what we did, and we were proud of what we were doing as far as making the food. I was very serious about that, even though I hadn't bought in. But then working for this one temperamental Italian gentleman who had a very small restaurant, which he had with his wife, his pregnant wife, I began to see things began to coalesce in my mind where I could envision me doing what he was doing, having a small restaurant with Janet, having a baby, a patron, a chef patron. Like, I was beginning to read, and I was reading a book called The Auberge of the Flowering Hearth. Fantastic book of these two women who had an inn, a little inn in the Carpathian Mountains. And they lived like it was the 1800s. They fished they caught their own fish, they shot their own game, they made everything from scratch. It was a kind of a hippie ideal in some ways, but it resonated with me. And I began to then see a way into becoming a chef in ways that I had not before.
So let's fast forward a little bit here. Tell us about your first restaurant and what it took to open that and what made you take that leap of faith to start your own.
Yes, I had, I guess I'd always wanted to control the ball. I really took like a fish to water when it came to, I wanted to write the menus. I wanted no one to tell me, here's the menu and just follow that menu. I'd had bosses like that by that time. And so I'm reaching a point where it was really important for me to be expressing myself culinarily. I got a huge break. I got hired to be the chef de cuisine at a place called Louis' Backyard in Key West. It was 1985, and Louis was situated right on the Gulf of Mexico, right on the water, an astonishingly beautiful place. And I was made a partner in that restaurant. One of the other partners saw something in me, and I saw something in his abilities, which were really financial in wine, and we meshed. And we opened what became the first restaurant where I was co-owner of, and that was in Key West, not far away, right down in the middle of Old Town, at the Marquesa Hotel, at the corners of Fleming and Simonton Streets, and that was in 1988. And it was 38 seats, a jewel box restaurant. And 10 days in, the New York Times arrived and actually wrote about us, which was gigantic because Key West was still so far from national attention considering most things. And we really thought, this was going to be our 3-star. We were going after that. We were going in a place where Key West restaurants hadn't gone before. Unfortunately, we went right off the rails because it was so economically out of tune with reality that in less than 2 years we were done. And I had to then think what's next for Norman and the family, and what's next became moving from our chosen home of Key West to the big city of Miami. And that's what we did.
Incredible start and an incredible career that has continued. And of course, we're here today with the Trotter Project. Tell us about that first meeting of each other and how you became so close.
Charlie and I met in 1982. I had recently come up with Janet to rejoin our families. Our son was born in Key West in 80. Janet was extremely homesick, one of 8 children, big family, and she wanted to get back home. And my family was also from the same place because we were brought up right across the same lake from each other. So we trucked home. We got home, and baby Justin. So I put my resume out around, and fortunately I got a job working for Gordon Sinclair in Lake Forest, Illinois. And I was, in the pandemonium of opening up a new restaurant and doing something. Gordon was very astute. Gordon understood the idea of American cuisine and where it was going and how it was different than the cuisine that was there before it. And he had funny ways of sometimes expressing that. But he gave me an enormous amount of latitude to do what I was doing. One day, a busboy, his name I didn't know, he was a busboy, and I was, crazed chef trying to get the food out. He said, I'd like to work in the kitchen. And I said, why? And he goes, because I want to learn how to cook. And I go, well, we don't have any openings, and you look way too skinny and way too pale to me. I don't think so. And I sort of remember his arms kind of being crossed as he was speaking to me. And he came back the next day and he said, any openings or something like that? And I'm like, do you have amnesia? No, we don't have any openings. This went on for a couple more days, if not weeks. And then Carrie Nahabedian, great Carrie Nahabedian, one of the great chefs of the Midwest and America, she was my sous at the time, although she really was more knowledgeable than me. She said, let's give him a try. We need somebody in garde manger. And I said, all right, but he's your project. And that's how it started. And Charlie, my biggest memory of Charlie in those days was how often he came looking for bandages because he'd cut himself again. And I would tease him a little bit and say, we're out, you gotta go to the store, or something like that. But anybody that knows Charlie would be, I'm sure, I think, unless they were part of this family, would be very surprised that he seemed to be a somewhat timid and tentative young man that he was. But that didn't last. It changed, and it changed quickly. We found our friendship began to really form when he moved to California to go to school, and he began to write me postcards and letters, and others too, like Carrie. He's the best at communicating through letters and postcards, and famously, because of the movie, the documentary. But we began to see we had a deep shared love of literature. And when he found that me as chef loved literature and he as chef loved literature and music, it created a bond in us that really accelerated and became stronger. And he was just so incredibly marvelously smart. He was writing these postcards about his experiences going to the restaurants in San Francisco at that time, because that's where he was studying. And he was so sophisticated in his way of describing the food and the service and the food and the beverage program, and as if he was 20 years older than he was at the time. I have so many packets addressed to me in the various addresses in Key West and then later Miami, with his handwriting, which is in and of itself another thing. And then on the outside of the packages, he would sometimes have long quotes from Dostoevsky or Henry Miller or whomever, and savagely funny oftentimes too, a cutting wit. and I just was so like, who is this guy, and how did he decide? How did he pick me? What did he find in me that made us have that click? I felt very selected in a beautifully chosen way.
With this interview, we are announcing that you are the newest board member officially of the Trotter Project, but we all have to say it's been unofficial from the start. What made you say that it was time and that it was important for you to be involved with the organization on this level?
When someone gives you the kind of love that Charlie gave me, and by extension gave my family, Janet, Justin, he always wrote, the books, he inscribed the books to all of us. You want to carry on their vision, you want to carry on their work, you want to join others that get it, that understand the mission that was more than the beautiful food and the beautiful plates and the beautiful wine list and all of those things. It was the same human being that saw the benefit of creating Cabrini greens and trucking students from poor means to come and have dinner in the building next door to the restaurant. All of those things that Charlie was also about, his extraordinary breadth. The Trotter Project is continuing that work in ways that I think makes him smile from heaven, and to be in the choir with you all is something I really am looking forward to.
A big part of that mission is really helping chefs, folks in the hospitality and agricultural industries of the future. What would you say to someone who is looking to enter any of these fields? What is your biggest piece of advice?
There's so much misunderstanding when it comes to the restaurant world that's been magnified by recent histories. There's been some correcting going on, but I think that it's almost a little bit of a cliche or a cartoonish sort of expectation that people have of the restaurant world, that they think that it's like Hell's Kitchen or something like that, when it's not. And that's, I think part of my job is to broaden the minds of the cooks in particular, and I use the term cook and chef depending upon where we are within, not so much by ability, but what's their responsibility at the time. There's times when I'm cook too, and I like being a cook. I like it every day. Being a chef is being kind of the organizer in a way. So for the Trotter Project and the things that you just touched on, Sarah, that have to do with everything from food sourcing and agriculture and gardens and community work and all of those things, I think that the definition of a chef needs to be much greater, much more expansive than the cliched version of the chef who is dressed from head to toe in whites and screaming and demanding and threatening and all of those things. I think that's wasn't the way it was for many, and that's not the way it is sustainable. And so that's what we need to give to these generations coming up now.
I love that you say you are a cook and a chef. A few other hats that you've worn over the years are author, film and written contributor, and you now have your own Amazon series, Mormons for the Kitchen. What made you say you really wanted to step out of the kitchen to be able to show more people what's going on within?
There used to be a phrase back in the militant days of the Vietnam War when people would say, by any means necessary. And I'm flipping that phrase around in the positive version of it, which is, I am on this earth to tell a story about food. The terroir of my story is South Florida, Central Florida. The characters in my story are the people who cook with me, who bring me the food to cook, the customers that I serve. I can tell that story by making the food from a stove and a cutting board, or I can tell that story through books, or I can tell that story through video series. So those are the various means necessary. There's a quote that, it's always going to be a quote, I think. There's a quote that I believe it was the gentleman who changed his name to Baba Ram Das. I think his born name was Richard Alpert, and he said, at the end of the day, we're all just walking each other home. So if I had a coda to that, it would be an addendum to that. It would be like, let's make sure the food's good.